Before we go into our interview today, I wanted to let everyone know we have a new sponsor for our Energy Question podcast, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, or USOGA for short. First established in 1917, USOGA has been an effective and creative voice for the industry for more than a century now. USOGA is dedicated to educating the public, policymakers, and legislators at the federal, state, and local levels about the value of the domestic oil and natural gas industry. If you're in the industry and not currently a USOGA member, please consider joining the association as a way of helping it tell your story to the policymakers whose actions impact everything you do each and every day. You can start that process by contacting USOGA through its website, usoga.org. Thanks so much to USOGA for sponsoring the Energy Question podcast. And now on with our show.
Hey, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackman. I am your host, David Blackman, and I have with me a very, very special guest today. It's Doomberg, the lead writer for Doomberg at Substack. Doomberg, how are you doing today?
David, doing great. Quite the honor to be here. I'm looking forward to a very robust discussion.
Well, it's really an honor to have you here. You've been one of my favorite writers about energy and economics for years now, and I just really am very honored that you'd come on our podcast here today. I always enjoy your insights and expertise on things that I really care about. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So I think before we get into the Q&A, and I just love the chicken, man. That's so awesome. Before we get into it, though, take a minute or two and talk about the origins of Doomberg, why you're there, what your mission is, and what you're trying to accomplish.
You bet. Doomberg is, as you say, it's a Substack. We write 6 to 8 articles per month. We are, 100% subscriber supported. We run a subscription business now. This is what we do for a living. We are a small team of former executives from the commodity sector. I personally am a scientist and have a pretty good molecular map of how the globe works and how economies operate down to the sort of chemical molecular level, and we leverage that expertise combined with the finance training on our team to write about energy finance and the economy at large. And we think the thing that makes us unique, and one of the reasons why we've been successful, is because we do bring that industrial lens to topics of the day. Very few people from industry with relevant training in the sectors that we cover are free to communicate openly on these topics. They are hindered by corporate public affairs teams and fear of saying the wrong thing and being canceled or losing their RSUs or their stock options. And so most people with relevant industrial experience simply stay out of the debate.
Yeah.
And this is the inefficiency in the market that we have chosen to occupy. And it has been really quite the journey. As you mentioned, we're now two and a half years into this, and we are stunned and humbled to be the number one finance Substack in the world, and among the probably top 5 most successful Substacks on the platform. Very grateful to the Substack team, grateful for every subscriber, and it truly is the work of my life. And we are so blessed to be able to wake up every day and do what you love and make a healthy living doing it. So this is my literal definition of rich, and so yeah, that's the background. That's the story on Doomberg.
Well, that's fantastic. I just please accept my gratitude for filling the space you're filling, because I know how hard it is. I was in government affairs and communications myself in the corporate world for a long, long time, out of it now, so I can write at Substack myself. And the beauty of Substack is it gives you a lot of freedom to create as you want and say what is really on your mind. And so far anyway, has resisted efforts by our government to censor things there, and hopefully that'll continue. In fact, I want to start our discussion today by the announcement you made on August 2nd, and I found you on Twitter a couple of years ago, and that's how I started following you. But you announced on August 2nd, which is about a week before we're recording this, that you will be essentially leaving Twitter, although you're not deleting your account, which is smart. I made that mistake once. And focusing on Substack for a variety of reasons that I wanted to give you a chance to talk about here at the top of the show.
So when people say that we, quote, are leaving Twitter, I suppose that's technically true, although in reality, Twitter has left most Substack authors months ago. You, as a fellow author on the platform, will know all too well that when Substack decided to launch Notes, which is
Right.
a competitive offering to Twitter, they did so at sort of the apex of the chaos around the new management's ownership, early days of ownership of the Twitter platform. As you know, they fired most of their employees and made all kinds of changes to the platform. One of the things that happened once Substack announced that it was developing Notes was that any and all links to Substack articles were throttled. We believe that our account itself was probably shadow banned in some form or another. The platform used to be a wonderful outlet for our creativity and a great way for people to find Doomberg, but we've grown big enough now. And to build a business like this is one thing, to maintain and to perhaps even grow or beat back churn is a completely different matter altogether. And for several months, we were in denial, still pouring a lot of effort into the Twitter platform and seeing radically diminished returns on our effort. And look, we're a very, very small team. You could count on one hand the number of people involved in Doomberg and have a few fingers left over. And we have to prioritize. We've stayed lean on purpose. We believe, we joke around the office that if we hired 10 more people, we might be 20% more effective. You know, if you have fully dedicated, 100% focused, eat what you kill, you know, mindset of execution and discipline and continuous improvement, we have to guard our resources very carefully. You know, we have hired a social media assistant to help and maintain the mirage that we're still active on Twitter, perhaps. That would risk the magic that is embedded in our team. But more importantly, we don't really say it in the article, but one of the things that we're trying to do is to help smaller Substacks who were gaining no eyeballs and no leverage and no traction on Twitter, to create the opportunity for perhaps a critical mass of people to move over to Notes. And this is where we're going to be exclusively participating going forward. Look, and full disclosure, we are equity investors in Substack. We participated in that author-led round. We wrote a pretty healthy check. They're our partners. We want to see them succeed. So we are not unbiased or without conflict as we ponder this decision. And we disclosed that in the piece. That's not why we left Twitter, but it certainly impacted where we decided to go. So we're not on Threads or LinkedIn or anywhere else of consequence. And so, you know, the new owner of Twitter is free to do whatever he wants with his privately owned property. It's a shame that the systematic sort of de-throttling of all Substack related material has occurred. It's still occurring. We showed in the piece where if we would publish a link to one of our articles, you know, historically we would get 500 to 1,000 likes, and recently we got, I think, 14 over a period of 9 days. And ostensibly we have 259,000 followers on Twitter. I mean, that tells you the data. Now, look, we have 175,000, 176,000 emails on the Substack platform. That is an unbelievable foundation of growth. We've decided to ask our readers to help us grow through referrals and gifts. And by the way, this totally aligns our incentives. So if we continue to delight our readers, then they will help us grow. And that is far better than trying to trick an algorithm that is programmed against us. And so with very limited resources and almost on principle, you know, we would rather lose with our partners than win with an antagonist. And we don't think that, you know, the new owner of Twitter is specifically antagonistic towards us. We just happen to be Substack. We, you know, dance with the one that brought you. We grew this business with the help and partnership of Substack, and we love many members of the team and gotten to know them over the year, from the CEO down to individual developers who've helped us improve the site. And so rather lose with our partners and go all in on the Substack experiment.
Well, I admire your loyalty. I've also noticed that in addition to leaving Twitter, some of the bigger Substack users have left Substack to go on to other places, which displays kind of a lack of loyalty, in my view, to the platform that kind of allowed them to build their business in the first place. So I admire that, and I'm glad to know you're an equity investor there, because it gives me confidence that Substack will remain an independent kind of platform that's continues to fight for free speech and free expression on the platform. So
Yeah,
really appreciate that.
we think people who leave are relatively short-sighted, not just for the loyalty reasons. Substack's fee, as you know, it's widely known, is 10%. Most people think of that fee as being merely the cost of the back office. And there's no doubt that we could build a website and manage logins and credit cards for far less than 10% of what we're generating on that platform. But actually, that 10% also covers a fair bit of your marketing budget because of the referral program. They have probably well north of 10 million emails in the ecosystem. Many of these people have their credit cards on file with Substack, which makes it very easy for them to buy your product. This is part of, we've described how we built Doomberg in various other settings using a 5 pillars approach. And channel is one of those 5 pillars of any business. And we have decided that Substack will be our channel. And look, as you say, when we started Substack, we had 0 emails. And we've worked with them and listened to some of their advice and convinced them that some of the advice they're giving authors is perhaps suboptimal, and ran our own business. And they've always been helpful and responsive. And we've created this together, and they've done nothing that would cause us to consider leaving. And we've been offered to be purchased and join other platforms, and we've said no to all of those. We wrote a piece, one of the Work with My Life pieces, where we talked about the disease of more. And when you have way more than enough, then the pursuit of more for the sake of it is a disease. And look, would we like more? Of course. Would we like to double our business from here? Certainly. Is there a price that we would sell Doomberg? Of course. It's a lot higher than anybody out there would be willing to pay, but there is a number. Everybody has a number.
Sure.
But, if you think about our lives, we get up. We hold no meetings. My only scheduled meetings are podcasts. That's one of our rules. We write 6 to 8 pieces a month. In so doing, we learn an enormous amount. We meet brilliant people. We interact with our subscribers who have voted with their wallets that they would like us to keep doing this. And we get to attack each day, as Jim Harbaugh would say, with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind. Like, I get up and savor every day, having this is a way to say it, David. And I know we're kind of going long on this topic, but
this is fine. This is fine. This is the main one I want to cover.
It is worth saying. When we first started Doomberg, if you'd have said, "What is your wildest dream of possible success?" Like, pick a crazy number. Without telling you what that number is, we're sitting at roughly 3 times that number today. Now, let me ask you something. What would most people do? They would redefine what their wildest dreams are. Why would we want to do that? So if we leave Twitter and we lose half our business, well, that's still well north of our wildest dreams.
Yeah.
And, the point of life isn't to accumulate a bunch of digits on a screen and then die without having experienced the benefit of having accumulated them. The point of life is to live each day doing as much as you can that you love to do, and as little as you can that you don't like to do. We actually have a phrase for this. It's called, what is our get to, have to ratio? What are the things we're doing during the day that we would consider get tos? And what are the things that we do during our day that we would consider have tos? And how do we make that number bigger? And I get to be a guest on your podcast today. This is fantastic. I'm always happy to talk about energy and life and business with brilliant people. And today is also edit day. I turned in the latest piece, which is a fun one, tentatively titled Warehouse Wars, where we talk about how the humble warehouse is going to become the new natural gas pipeline in the eyes of environmentalists, and they're going to attack that point source of vulnerability in our economy. What a great piece to write. Did a lot of research, excited to publish it. What's wrong with my day? Why do I need to go and focus on whether or not we're growing at 5% or 15%? You have to have humility in life. We're just so blessed. And if you can't savor achieving multiple times your wildest dreams, then what can you savor?
Right. You're never going to be satisfied.
Yeah. It's a disease, and we refuse to suffer from that disease.
Yeah, exactly. That's the attitude I've had about all this myself. I've been a lot less successful than you guys have, but it's the same attitude. So let's talk about energy. I couldn't help noticing at the bottom of the emails we exchanged, every one of your emails, you have this motto, energy is life, which I agree with. But I wonder what you mean when you say energy is life. What does that mean to you?
from a biophysical perspective, all living organisms are energy harvesters. And our standard of living as humans is quite literally defined by how much energy we get to harvest and actually waste. And I don't mean waste in a sort of flippant way. I mean waste in the thermodynamic way. The human endeavor is a constant, unrelenting struggle against the forces of entropy in order to impose order on your local environment. You must waste heat. Right angles don't spontaneously appear in nature. And your home, your castle, all of these things require energy to maintain, as you well know. And so, quite literally, our friend Nate Higgins defined this as, society's net energy production, the amount of energy made available to humans to do useful work, net of the amount of energy that goes in to produce that energy, defines the integral of our collective standard of living. And then there's the societal questions about how that is distributed, equitably or not across the humans on the planet. But the more energy you personally get to leverage and harvest, the higher your standard of living. And since all humans everywhere want a higher standard of living, the phrase "energy is life," we conceived that phrase and have popularized it because it does crystallize that energy is not just another commodity. Energy is the master economy, a master commodity, as our friend Luke Roman likes to call it. And once we understand that, then it really brings it to focus the criticality of getting our national and even international energy policies correct.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to another subject, a related subject, is that something I've written about several times recently, and that is this emerging narrative of the energy transition that has previously told us, well, we're just going to replace all these high density sources of energy like oil and gas and nuclear with all these low density sources, wind and solar, electric vehicles. And everything's going to be sweetness and light, and it's all going to be smooth, and your lifestyle isn't going to have to change. That's the previous narrative before this year. This year, at least what I've seen, I wonder if you agree, we've seen the emergence now of a narrative that's always been in the background, and that is to make this transition work, everybody else, you're all going to have to lower your standard of living and consume less energy to make this all work, right? I mean, do you see that becoming as prevalent as I do now, and the messaging coming out of these activist groups pushing the transition?
Oh, there's no question. And in fact, this is just physics, reimposing itself onto reality. It was always going to be the case that in order to manage down our carbon emissions, which is just a proxy for how much energy you use, given that we're still a carbon-based economy, in order for that to happen, we would have to impose lower standards of living. And then in order for that to happen, you need dictatorial forms of government, because no free-thinking people, no democratic society is going to spontaneously decide to self-immolate. And so we wrote a piece on this exact topic in June called "Green is the New Red." And we talked about this amazing conference called Beyond Growth.
Yeah.
And it's not like this was some, outcast.
And that was the one sponsored by the EU, right?
No, it was held in the European Union Parliament.
Yeah.
And none other than the president of the European Union gave the opening keynote. And
right.
There's 18 hours of this word salad available for you to consume on the internet. I don't recommend people do it because I doubt you get past 18 minutes of it. We tried, but the plenary, these focus panels were just amazing.
Yeah.
When you go through it, and our favorite one, was how can we unlock a just and sustainable economy through universal basic services? And then the next one was cutting the addiction of labor to growth, the 4 days week. And then the final one, which was, after listening to those two, one wonders how they can't see the irony in this: from the welfare state to the social ecological state, how to organize and finance welfare without growth. Like, great question, guys. I mean, good luck with it. It's just absurd. And so green is the new red. The red part of this is the common people will not be allowed to resist. And so in order for us in the West to proactively degrow, they will have to maintain a dictatorial, authoritarian type approach, which we don't think is sustainable. But even if we did free up all of this energy, the global South would greedily consume it post haste.
Right.
We've developed something called Doomberg's postulate, where we basically said, and I think we're right on this, that every molecule of fossil fuels produced in the world will be burned by somebody somewhere, and local restrictions on their use merely shift who gets the privilege of doing so. This is why we're seeing record demand for coal globally. This is why we're seeing record demand for natural gas globally, and why we're seeing record demand for oil globally.
And for wood. We're burning more wood than we ever burned, right?
Well, that's because Europe has an artifact of their carbon accounting is if you could land biomass, which is clear cut from the U.S. Southeast, and burn it in a giant furnace in the UK, somehow this is emission free,
right?
Which is one of the greatest farces. But to your original question, the big lie that has been told until this year is that we could do this transition with minimal changes to our standard of living. That was always the big lie. That was always the sleight of hand. And as evidence, the evidence which was always going to appear that this was in fact a big lie, we're now seeing that narrative shift. And we suspect this is the beginning of the end of our myopic focus on ESG. And we can go ahead and tackle some bigger problems like pollution control, income inequality, infrastructure issues here in the West in particular. Our system of government, Neil Howe in his new book, The Fourth Turning, has arrived, or The Fourth Turning is Here. I forget what the exact title is, a follow-up to their really remarkable book published more than 20 years ago now. This is the time. This nonsense can't go on forever. And one of the things that we say is that which can't go on forever usually doesn't.
And so if it can't go on forever, and yet its advocates want to maintain it, and they can only maintain it through authoritarian government, what does that say in terms of a threat to our system of free and fair elections in the United States and Europe, in your view?
It doesn't bode well. They're not going to go out quietly. We do believe that political upheaval is the path out of this swamp that we're in. And we hope that it's peaceful, but it doesn't need to be. And history shows it often isn't. And we have said, on the path from abundance to starvation is riot, and the people will riot. And if you just look, we're already beginning to see in Germany, for example, the rise of what the establishment would call far right-wing political parties, much to their horror. And the more they try to disqualify this party, the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, or known in the English language, the Alternative for Germany, the more they try to tar and feather them out of the political discourse, we believe the Streisand effect will kick in, and more disenfranchised people in Germany will flock to that party as a form of expressing their disgust and disdain for the ruling elite that got them into this equation. And one of the things we find amazing is even the reporting on all this sort of reactionary right-wing rise of the right-wing parties in Germany. It is reported as though they are just leveraging discontent and economic malaise, as though that discontent and malaise just spontaneously appeared. It had nothing to do with the policies that are being implemented, the complete deindustrialization of the once powerful German manufacturing sector, the proactive shutting down of perfectly usable, some of the world's best nuclear power plants, and then heading full speed ahead into an energy crisis, and escaping the worst aspects of the winter of last year, and then stupidly confusing good luck with sound strategy, as they seem intent on doing. We're one cold snap away from a real mess over there, and let's hope it doesn't happen. But if it does, I could tell you that the popularity of AfD is going to go up, not down.
Yeah.
And so, let's hope it's peaceful. If the progressive left decides that the plebes should have no say in how they are governed, we shall see. But history is filled with regimes expressing such arrogance, being overthrown in unfortunately violent ways as well. And I wouldn't rule that out. I wouldn't rule out in a major Western country. Look what we're seeing in France.
Right.
I wouldn't rule it out. I'm not hoping for it. In fact, we're trying our best to advocate for policies that would get ahead of such circumstances and developments in a way that allows us to get to the right answer, which is everyone knows, by the way, there is no path to meaningful decarbonization that does not run straight through the heart of nuclear power. It is the highest energy density
Right.
form that we have available to us. And the countries that are exploiting it are doing just fine, and the ones that aren't are struggling. It's just that simple.
Yeah, it really is that simple. I was asked the question the other day if I see a peaceful way out of this, and did some research, and it's hard historically to find examples of totalitarian leftist totalitarian regimes giving up power peacefully. It has happened in the past, but it hasn't happened often, and so at least a look back through history isn't encouraging in that regard. I would love to be wrong about all that, but I don't think I am. Let's talk about, before we've got 5 minutes left, so let's talk about, I want to talk to you about BRICS. I know you wrote a story about BRICS and the possibility for a gold-backed currency backed by the BRICS alliance, which I see as a real emergence, not just me, everybody sees as an emerging power on the global stage. And I wonder what you see potentially coming out of that group summit meeting later this month. We
would fade gold bug enthusiasm around the prospects of anything meaningful coming from that summit, unfortunately. And we wrote a piece called Something or Nothing, where we, quite unusually for us, we canvassed 5 experts for their opinions, and they all agreed to participate. And then we sort of wrapped them into a narrative, and then concluded the piece by saying where we fall on the matter. And for us, gold, I should be clear, like our investment philosophy has 3 legs. We earn money in fiat. We save by buying real assets like land and gold and collectibles. And then we tend to speculate or invest in the private markets where we can affect the outcome. And so for us, gold is not a speculation medium. It is a way for us to save excess earnings ahead of any potential investments we might want to make. And so the actual price of gold as measured in US dollars is pretty irrelevant to us. We measure our gold holdings in ounces, not in dollars. And so in that context, a careful reading of what those 5 experts submitted to us and our own analysis actually finds little that people disagree on. Displacing the US dollar will be hard and take longer than many think. Lots of countries would like to do so, and the seizing of Russia's assets has only increased the motivation for them to try, as we're seeing in fits and starts with the BRICS countries. The ultimate impact on the price of gold and oil and the value of the US dollar compared to other currencies, in the unlikely event that such an effort succeeds, is just incredibly difficult and challenging to model. And so one of our bedrock philosophies in life is, when in doubt, do nothing. And so aside from keeping, a watchful eye on these developments to satisfy our own intellectual curiosity, or perhaps to write a follow-up piece after the conference is over, that's certainly what we intend to do. Our allocation to gold is unchanged. And by the way, if we wake up tomorrow and the price of gold has suddenly popped to $5,000 an ounce or $10,000 an ounce, I can assure everybody listening that is not something to celebrate. You don't want your hedges and your insurance policies to pay off. Last I checked, I'm happy each year that my house doesn't burn down, and I still happily pay my insurance policies. And so I would much prefer a world where we get sane about our energy and fiscal policies, and the wealth that we create can be preserved through a currency that is stable and not being debased at the pace at which it is today. And there's no amount of gold or land or collectibles that one can acquire to insulate themselves from all of the negative shocks of a total societal breakdown, which is what such a repricing of gold would ultimately signal. And so we are more than happy for the world to stay relatively stable and gold to stay about its current price, because that means the rest of the system is operating in a more stable way, which is what we should all be cheering for. We're seeing reports that as many as 15 countries, even more than that, have applied for at least some level of membership in BRICS. I don't know if you have any information on that other than what's in public domain. I wonder if you think they'll be adding members at this summit meeting. I should say up front, we have no particular expertise to add that would give us information alpha over what we read in the newspaper, like you and the listeners to this podcast. If you pushed me, I would say they would probably begin to add new members, although how that would work in the internal mechanics and power play with the existing countries is kind of difficult. We like to think of things like BRICS and OPEC Plus as unified entities that have a singular purpose and execute with a disciplined strategy. That's rarely the case. And so we shall see. We are interested observers like everybody else. I mean, if you ask me about the nuances of various energy markets or commodities and how they interplay with each other, we'd feel far more confident giving a more definitive opinion. And one of the things that I think our subscribers enjoy about our work is that when we don't have particular expertise to add, we try not to pretend like we do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to always know when to say, I don't know. So that was one of the best lessons in life I was ever taught by a defense attorney. I have never had the experience of interviewing a cartoon character before today. I really appreciate this. And I have to say that the people behind the cartoon character are obviously incredibly astute, and I really appreciate your work product and wish you the best of luck going forward. And I didn't get to several of the questions I wanted to ask, but maybe we can do this again sometime in the future.
Absolutely. My pleasure, David. It was far too long for this conversation to have occurred. And let's not let the gap between this and the next one stretch any longer than it needs to.
I'll make a point of that. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great week.
You too, sir.
And thanks to the Sandstone Group for hosting our podcast, to the U.S. Oil and Gas Association for being our sponsor. Really appreciate you guys. And to our extraordinary producer, Eric Farrell, I'm David Blackman, and that is all for today.